This is the When Work Isn't Work podcast. This podcast exists to help people reignite the love of what they do in a post-pandemic world. The pandemic gave us a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to reflect on what is truly important to us in work and in life. I'm your host, Sinead Connolly, co-founder and director of Lotus People, an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency. We hope you enjoy today's chat. My guest today is the incredible Beck Day. Beck is a freelance writer and journalist, a podcast host of the amazing podcast I Swear I Never on news.com.au. She is a mum to 3 small humans and one of the funniest, most divine and engaging humans that I've ever met. Grabbing her on a very short whirlwind visit to Sydney for the Podcast Awards, I was lucky enough to talk through Beck's career, her passions, and there are some serious gems in this conversation that I know everyone will enjoy. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy. Beck, welcome to the When Work Isn't Work podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Oh, I love your energy already. You can tell that you are a podcaster instantly. It's the enthusiasm. And to be honest, with my level, I've literally just got in from my gallivanting around Europe, and with my level of jet lag, I'm actually impressed that I remember the name of my podcast because that's kind of what we're dealing with at the moment. Thank you so much for joining me. It's a double whammy of goodness because one, I get you here for an hour to talk all things career and work and passion, but at the same time, I get to see you in the flesh.
IRL.
We literally haven't seen each other, I would say, in a couple of years. Is that right?
Well, there was a wedding
a month
we
ago.
saw each other. But before that, a couple of years. And weddings don't count.
Because everyone's in a whirlwind. But no, it's so fabulous to have you here. So thank you for your time and for joining us. I have absolutely loved the last kind of few episodes of recording this. We've had some amazing feedback, and essentially what the premise of it is just delving into passion and purpose and things that light my fire and talking through, I guess careers and kind of what got you here. And you definitely are someone who I know you love what you do. And I think it's super special for us for this episode because everyone I've been speaking to has been in the business world and has been in the land of either recruitment or kind of leadership in business. And so having someone from media and entertainment and a podcaster who hopefully you don't put me to shame with your professionalism is amazing. So in order to kick us off, could you give us a little bit of an overview of where your career, job, purpose is at the moment? What are you doing at the moment?
Okay, so I'm a journalist by trade and I've been a journalist for about 15 years. I think, that makes me feel really old.
Don't count the years.
No. And I've previously worked in media as an editor and as a journalist, but right now what I'm doing is freelancing. I have a podcast through News Corp called I Swear I Never, shameless plug.
An amazing podcast.
And so I do that. I write for a bunch of magazines. Sometimes I write for Marie Claire. Sometimes I write for At Home magazine. I write for news.com.au. And basically I'm just freelancing around the place, writing what I love, doing project-based work, and of course doing my podcast, which is my passion.
Amazing. And I know that from a lot of the podcasts that I listen to, of whether it's in Australia or in the UK, a lot of freelance journalists who are now podcasters, broadcasters, etc. I know from kind of hearing their story that it is a journey to get there, to get to a point where you can essentially kind of build a career and make money and have the stability of kind of making a living off freelancing. It can be difficult to get to because obviously you don't have that kind of full-time salary and you don't have that consistency. How did you get to this sweet spot where you are doing everything you love, which is obviously a relatively unique position to get to?
So I think, firstly, I think the shift from a lot of freelance journalists starting podcasts is because journalists in general love telling stories, and podcast is just a new way to do that. Yeah. So it's a perfect fit because it also lets us be incredibly verbose because you're not limited to 800 words. No one can tell you to shut up.
There's no word count limit.
No, that's right. You can just ramble on and no one can stop you.
An extrovert's dream.
Absolutely. So the podcasting side of things actually started many, many years ago. So I was was working in traditional media. I was working for a parenting website called KidSpot, and myself and a few of my colleagues decided that we were going to start the first ever podcast that News Corp did. Citation needed, but I'm pretty sure it was the first podcast that News Corp did. Anyway, we did this we started this parenting podcast, and it kind of went nowhere because nobody knew what to do with podcasts back. I think it was 2014. And then over time that evolved, and one of my other colleagues, Nina Young, who I've done 2 podcasts with her now. We did an amazing podcast about her life called My Father the Murderer. She discovered when she was 27 that her biological father, was in prison for murder and had met her mother while in prison and conceived her around the same time, but she'd never known until she was a grown-up. And she always says that, like, if you want to create somebody who is an excellent investigative journalist, you should keep secrets from them as a child because
she spent her whole life researching.
100%. And so we did that, and then from that we realized that we really loved telling people stories, and that's how I Swear I Never was kind of born. But I was thinking a little bit about how to do a job that you love. And I think there's 2 components to it really, because number one, I think you're really, 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 really lucky if you have a clear passion and I have been incredibly lucky, and I see it in one of my children. He is, I've always been into writing from the minute I could do it. That was what I was all about. I was all about being dramatic and telling stories and getting people to listen to me. Like, that was my big thing. I see it in my kid. My oldest kid is 6, and he has been obsessed with animals since the minute he could know what an animal was. And now he's 6, and he said to me, I'm going to be a zoologist. I was just wondering if I should start, now, just to become an expert. He was like, maybe I could just start giving sick birds medicine. And I was like, well, I think that would be catastrophic.
Keep the cowbell away from him.
We're not going to be medicating birds. But I see it in him, and I'm like, you're so lucky because you have something that makes you happy, and that you already know how to parlay it into a career. Now, whether or not that's going to happen, he also wants to be a stunt plane pilot. So, anything could happen.
Focus less on that one and more on the animals for your own sanity.
Yeah. But I think having that starting point is really helpful. It's by no means the only way that you can end up doing something that you love, but it's very helpful when you have that blueprint from a young age. And the other thing is that I feel like get yourself a work wife.
Yes. I have a work wife.
I know you do. And I just feel like, because if you are someone who loves connection and that connection presents itself at work, then you will always love work, whatever that is. Because, Nina became my work wife many, many moons ago. We have been creatively in a couple, for want of a better word, ever since that point. And it makes what we do joyous because we're getting to connect. We understand each other. We work well together, but there's also that human element, which I think has to be there.
100%. And Laura has been on the podcast, and although we don't work together in the same business day to day anymore, she is still my work muse. And I called her my work muse the other day when it was her birthday. All of the other things that she is in my life, as I'm sure Nina is to you as well. But you're so right. It is, and recruitment as well. It's connection, right? It is about stories and people and the tapestry of their lives and their careers and what gets them to where they are. And that's what fascinates me. I absolutely kind of power through memoirs and biographies and anything that's like people history. I'm a nosy thing, basically. I say nosy bitch, and I'm like, this is my podcast, I'm allowed to curse.
You're totally allowed to curse.
I really, people ask me that often. They're like, are we allowed to curse? I'm like, yes, there's no censory here. Yes. But it's, you're so right. When you do thrive off that connection and you work in an industry or the type of person, I mean, I think basically we all need connection. But when you are particularly in a space where you kind of have that ability to create with someone else, it's just having that sounding board. And when you kind of get that, you shouldn't let it go. And I think even like myself and Laura, we've had these kind of paths that were running concurrently, but then they diverged. But even still, we've been able to lean on each other and obviously be inspired by each other on an ongoing basis as well. So I love that as advice. Get yourself a work wife. It's completely true. And with regards to, I guess, the having that passion young, and it's amazing about Frankie that you can see that in him. And of course, you don't know how he's going to go. You're not going to start signing him up to veterinary colleges right yet.
Oh no, absolutely. I want him to start bringing home the bacon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've been a resource drain for a number of years, mate. Let's turn it around.
Time to pay the rent, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. But I've always been envious of that. I've had friends, and I've had people. I have a friend who, from a very young age, from when we were kids, was so into music, and any instrument he touched, he could play. And now he's touring with all these big names and just having this incredible life. And that was his passion. And I did a commerce degree. And so in my commerce degree, it was what do you do with this? And I was envious of people who studied nursing and who studied just anything that would give you a tangible thing, like a career. I was like, I want a career. No idea what that looks like. No idea what that is. So,
but I think with you, the interesting thing is, like you say, connection is what drives you, right? Yes. So it's whatever gets you into that flow state, which sounds wanky, but it's like whatever that thing is that doesn't feel like work, and the time drips by in massive globs, and all of a sudden it's nighttime and you don't know what you've been doing. Yeah. Whatever it is that gets you into that flow state is what needs to be at the core of what you do. And like you said, for you, it's connection. Yeah. Recruitment is all about connection. I am 100% confident that if you turned your hand to psychology, to counseling, to matchmaking, to whatever it was, as long as people are at the core of it, you're going to be in that flow state, and you're going to be doing what you love.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for anyone listening, and for anyone who kind of is wondering about whether they don't have that distinct passion, it's you can either have it and you can figure it out, or it's a little you might be writing from a young age, or it's a bit more about what are the soft skills, what are you drawn to, what are you might have to peel back a few layers to get there, which is also very doable. It's still accessible in that way as well. With flow state, I mean, this is something we have spoken about on the podcast before. It has come up because naturally, when you're thinking about passion and people being in work that they love, flow state is something that we all kind of aspire to be in. It's a place, as you said, where it gets to the evening and you've no idea how much time passed, and it's a lovely, inspiring place to be. Given that you are working on so much that you find kind of fills your cup. You're working for these amazing outlets, you're doing your podcast, you're doing so much that you enjoy. Do you find that you do end up in flow state most of the time, or where does the stuff creep in where you start kind of resenting it and cursing those elements? Because it has to happen, right? I don't think there's a job. And maybe you're going to tell me that you're always in flow state, and I'll be like, God, she's nailing it.
No. And I think I used to be able to get into flow state much easier before I had children. And now that is such a luxury to be able to spend an hour. Yeah. Now my time is incredibly regimented, which I think has been one of the biggest challenges for me to overcome. And I'm still not nailing it at all. Yeah. Because I think I used to think I was busy. And I used to have the luxury of spending 8 hours getting absorbed in whatever I used to love. And I used to have this Pomodoro technique.
45 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And that was, now I look back on myself and I'm like, oh, remember.
Idiot.
But so now it's interesting because I think it's been a real reality check as well, because I'm not deluded enough to think that everybody gets to do what they love, or that privilege doesn't exist where you can choose to do what you love rather than just having to do what you have to do. And in some ways, having to split my time in so many ways, and to have my attention fragmented so much, because there are things that are now more important than the work that I'm doing. Unequivocally, anyway, you cut it, there are other things that are more important. And yet that part of me hasn't gone away, and that part of me that still needs that hasn't gone away. And I think when I first had my first kid, and I was like, I would love to just never have to work again, and I just want to be his mum for the rest of my life. And that lasted about 18 months, and then I was like, screw this. Toddlers are a whole new ballgame.
No thanks.
Yeah, exactly. And as with each new kid, the last of whom was like an accident, so that was really
welcome to the world, Alfie.
Yeah, love you, babe. Love You wouldn't change it. But I think realizing that you're then going to have competing things actually in a lot of ways makes you more passionate because you go, okay, well, I've got 45 minutes before I have to do school pickup, and then it's going to be dinner time, and then it's going to be witching hour, and then I'm going to fall asleep at 9:30 because I've been awake since 4 a.m. So it makes those little nuggets of time that you get to apply to what you love really, really, really luxurious. And because of that, it kind of enriches the experience. And so to get back to the question, I find it very difficult to get into flow state now. But when I do, it feels like a drug. And so I'm always chasing that ability to just have a chunk of time where I get to do something that I love and then it doesn't feel like work.
The dopamine in your brain when you get those 45-minute chunks of freedom is probably just like going off at all angles, just like, yes.
And now I have a phone full of reminders saying, pick up kids from school, because it is my deep fear.
That's amazing. Can you imagine forgetting the children?
Oh, mate, I swear one day I'm going to do it, because I get this like, I also have a thing in my car, which plugs into the lighter, which says, check the back seat when I stop and turn off the key, because it is my other deep fear. Obviously, I'm a neurotic person.
I was going to say, you're a mother. Mothers have of course, they have to be worried about where their children are at all times.
Well, and also I'm just neurotic by nature.
Okay, fair.
I'm a hypochondriac. I always think my kids are dying of some disease. But my big fear is leaving one of them in the car and not realizing until the afternoon that I've left them in the hot car all day.
Check the back seat is the best reminder ever.
And it changes the voices because it knows I get used to the voice. So occasionally it'll be a woman that's like, have you looked in the back seat? And then I'm like, oh God, okay, none of them are in the back seat.
That's amazing. Your brain knows that you are literally getting used to, we'll start tuning it out. That's so clever.
Yeah.
Is that an app or is that
It's just a little like dongle. I bought it on the internet when I was doom scrolling at 3 a.m. after breastfeeding one night. And I was like, I need this. I'm definitely going.
My life is not going to be safe until I have this. No, I love that. And I think it's something that I've heard from, and obviously I work with so many amazing, whether it's leaders or kind of business women or people who have these incredible careers who are obviously parents as well. And it's tricky, right? Like I think, not having children and being in this space where I do feel so busy, but I'm also aware that having 8 to 10 hours a day to purely do work is a complete luxury. But I think within that, there's so much opportunity for inefficiency, and you can end up getting caught in things that you don't need to get caught in, and you can end up in a situation where you're just kind of like toggling back and forth and multitasking and just not getting shit done, basically. I have a good friend, Erin, who was on the podcast with us, and she described she's actually about to pop next week, her second child, but she has described both of her maternity leaves as the most effective thing that's ever happened to her business, because she has systemized and kind of put in these process plans and basically project planned everything to get it to a point where her business is running effectively without her. And now that that's the case, and she is kind of balancing, of course, being a mother and coming back into the business, she's in a position where things are running really smoothly, and then she can kind of come in and out. So I haven't necessarily done that because I haven't had a need to. So then there's probably inefficiencies. So it's an interesting take, and it makes sense. And if you are doing, and again, as you said, it's a privilege, of course, right? To know to do something that you know you love, to get to that stage, to be able to do it, to build it up, is a privilege. But at the same time, you obviously are hyper aware of how lucky you are to enjoy that when you do have all of these. I don't know how you do it. 3 children, honest to God.
Oh, you just lower your standards with each child.
The third one's raising itself.
Yeah, I saw him eating hummus off the bin the other day, and I was like, protein?
Dirty protein is still protein. And being a mother and working freelance, and you relocated from Sydney, which is where you obviously have a huge kind of network and connection and group around you. You've relocated up to a new state. You have 3 kids. You work predominantly, if not entirely, remotely. How do you as a freelancer maintain that connection, like from a work perspective? Do you get it enough from kind of the podcasts that you do remotely and from the kind of meetings and all the rest, or do you find that you need to be mindful of that given that kind of shift in how you've been working, I guess?
Well, it's interesting. So I think I'm in a kind of unique situation in that I have always worked remotely. So even when I lived in Sydney, from my very, very first, when I first started as a full-time journalist, I was working for KidSpot, parenting website, and they had a very strange setup in that everybody was remote and we used to come in for one meeting a week on a Tuesday, and we used to Skype each other back in those days, and that's how we maintained our connections. And it's funny because I worked with an amazing bunch of women, all of whom I'm still friends with, today. And I feel like the online communication, because we were forced to connect online and we were in our own houses, and we were having that kind of intimate connection. Like I remember one of my good friends who I met when I first started at KidSpot, her name's Rebel. She actually lives up north where I live. So we have actually got more to do with each other now in person than we did, for the years
when
we
you
worked together. But we became so close. I remember she was one of the first people I told when I was pregnant, because you're online with your colleagues and you're not face to face. And I think I'd seen her twice in person and we had this intense, connection. A lot of my best friends, a lot of whom I'm, meeting up with now that I'm down in Sydney for the weekend, had these kind of online fostered relationships, which I think if you are a writer, I have to obviously the written word is an easy way for me to communicate and for them. So communicating via, chat windows was actually a really effective and intimate way to get to know people really quickly. So for me, not much has changed.
Yeah.
Like I say, Nina, my work wife, we have hours upon hours upon hours of conversations in, Facebook Messenger and in Instagram and
every forum,
text, every single forum. And it's weird because we stick in our lane for that conversation. Like right now I'm having two conversations with her. One is about what we're wearing to the podcast awards tonight. And the other one is about the hotel that we are staying in. And never the twain shall meet because we stick to our lanes. And then, in an hour, I'm going to see her IRL when we get our hair done for tonight. And I don't know what we're going to talk about.
I was going to say, will you mention either of the two?
Never. It's like cheating on each other with our multiple chat personas.
I was going to say some sort of multiple personality disorder thing going on. That's amazing. And you do get to maintain that, right? It's having that, and it's very progressive of that company back in the day, right? So it's that was ahead of its time.
Absolutely.
But obviously prepared you for the world better than other people. I'd say you were prepared for the world we were about to experience. You naturally are. I mean, obviously we've known each other years, but you naturally are an extrovert. And as you said, I loved your little giggle reaction to that. Like, yes, I am. And of course, many parts of your job and your role and what you do is of course externalizing and engaging with people. But do you find how I often, and this is probably an incorrect generalization, but I would often think of writers and journalists as heads down, sort of more introverted in demeanor or disposition. Do you find how do you find that those two sort of you can kind of reconcile those two things? The fact that you need to be quiet for ages.
Well, funny story. On the occasional days when I was in the office, because then obviously things evolved and I was in the office more when I was an editor and things like that. I remember one of my dear colleagues, Marg, saying to me, I used to think that Beck just needed to use her inside voice more. And I have now come to realize that she doesn't have one. And it's just always at high volume. And so actually I find offices very distracting.
Yes.
It's like my report card as a child, distracts others.
Yeah.
Because I'm just incapable of not catching up for 1,000 hours over, I say the water cooler. We never stood around the water cooler, but I stand around someone's desk and
hover over someone's desk, wondering what they're up to.
And I would find the more introverted among us would put on headphones very pointedly and kind of just be like, piss
it's a
off
signal.
But also I think for journalists particularly, I think in actual fact, if you're about telling people stories, then the biggest part of your job is actually connecting with other people. And then, you go away and you put your head down and you bash something out on the keyboard. But really the real work happens with extracting that story and telling that story. And also, I think having an interest. It is so obvious, I think, when I see somebody conducting an interview on telly or and if they're checked out, they're not interested. So unless you have a real thirst for understanding people and connecting with people, it's probably journalism's not for you, or at least the kind of journalism that I like to do.
That's it. And it is, even in that question, it's generalizations at all angles, because it's when you have that interest, when you have that motivation to, as you said, communicate a story and all the rest of it, it's of course that will fuel you, and of course you'll be able to do the heads down work as well. And all of us introverts and extroverts, we can do both. We can all kind of lean into the pendulum can swing both ways, and we can lean into the other side when needed. With your sort of, I guess, the journey of your career and everything that you've done, have you had any horror stories? Like, have you been in jobs where you've been like, oh my God, no, this is exactly what I thought I wanted to do, and it's like the opposite and send me screaming in the other direction?
Yes.
Yeah.
I will tell you a story. So I once worked for a person who I will not name, who I was fairly certain was a psychopath. And
I can picture you Googling psychopath.
No, literally that was most of my day on the company dime, just Googling psychopath. I was like, yep, this person meets every criteria. Anyway, and so it was not a great experience. I mean, it wasn't bad, but I really was like, once I got to the end of that job, and it was when I was very early in my career, I said to myself, I am going to follow my gut. I'm never going to work for someone who gives me bad vibes like that. And I'm going to get out before I'm too far in. And so one of the first jobs I got after that was for a different company, and I'm trying to be deliberately vague because my defamation censor is kicking in. But anyway, this person, I did an interview with the kind of the person who ran it was a website, person who ran the website, and I loved her. We connected so much, and I was like, you are great. You are one of my people. I will love this job. And then on my first day, I met the actual boss, and she came in there and it was like ice in the office, and everything was just not great. And then it was lunchtime, and I went in, and I already felt like I had a rapport with this person who had hired me, not the big boss, but this manager. And I said to her, like, what's the deal with the big boss? And she was like, oh, I was going to wait until your second week to let you know, but actually, there's all these issues, and there's, homophobia, and it was bad. And I was like, I've just got this job. What do I do? Do I stick it out? And then I was like, no, just follow your instinct. And so the next day I quit. I was like, that's it. One day is enough for me. I'm not going to do this. Anyway, fast forward 6 months, and this person's name comes up in the headlines and has been arrested for having a lot of drugs and cash at their premises, and went to jail, and didn't end up paying the rest of the people that worked for her, or at least they had to, these long retracted efforts to get their money. And so I was like, that is a very swift lesson from the universe in trusting your instincts, but also I did appreciate the drama.
Yeah. Grateful to have gone through it from a distance.
Absolutely.
Have some connection to the headlines, but not a close connection, thankfully. Yeah. That's amazing. But how amazing that you're one day in, your gut instinct and your intuition was firing and was like, nah, not doing it. Yeah. It's so important. And I think we see it as recruiters all the time. People who are in these situations and they're afraid to leave, and they're, well, what about, there's so many what ifs. What if it doesn't look good on my resume? What if I'm unhireable afterwards? And all of these things, I think people really come at it from a fear space. And you're better off. Like, you need to follow those, take action. If the intuition and the gut instinct is flashing, take action. And I'm sure you would not make a mistake like that, or not a mistake, but you would not have, you'd be very conscious in future of really assessing kind of who you work with, and knowing those partnerships are obviously so important as well, right? Yeah.
A friend of mine once sent me a meme that said, like, there's always one person in the workplace who's telling everybody to quit their jobs constantly. And that's me, because I feel like I am far more afraid to be stuck than I am to be in the unknown.
Yeah.
And, another thing that I always, one of my best friends, but also like a real mentor of mine, I was applying for a job, and it was her job, and she was moving into a different position. And it's always weird to talk about how much you earn, and there's always, there's two kind of sides to the party, and there's people who say that never want to talk about money, and, HR certainly never wants you to talk about money, but I come at it from the radically opposite view. And my friend Kerry taught me this. I was applying for her job and she said, I know we're not supposed to talk about how much we earn. This is exactly how much I'm earning, because I don't think women in the workforce should be kept in the dark about how much they're earning, because that's how they try and screw you. And so I knew exactly what I was asking for. It turned out to be more than I would have asked for. And so now I shout my salary from the rooftops to anyone who wants to hear. I mean, I don't want to talk about tax, man. But, when you are working in an organization, and I know that HR often frowns on this, so maybe you do it in a sneaky way. I don't know if that's okay to say, but tell everyone, especially women should talk about how much they're earning. A little while ago, an Excel spreadsheet got circulated, and it was just everyone in media, women in media, had just put in their position and what they earned.
God,
and
I
it was
love that.
It was amazing, because it's so empowering, right? That is exactly how people get siloed into their own imposter syndrome and not asking for what they truly deserve, because they think that everybody else is probably earning about the same as them. And there can be radically different amounts that you're earning for exactly the same work. And I think I think it applies to everyone, but certainly I think women are notorious for not asking for what they deserve and undercutting themselves. So at least knowing what your sisters in the workforce are earning is that little bit extra,
100%. This podcast is sponsored by Lotus People Recruitment. We are an award-winning Sydney-based recruitment agency with a genuine human-first and innovative approach. Lotus People are disrupting the recruitment industry by placing quality and service at the heart of all we do, recruiting roles across HR, talent, business support, and much more. Head to our website today for more information if you are a job seeker or an employer hiring staff. We're at lotuspeople.com.au. I'm really leaning into my generalizations today. I'm going to do it again. But it is, I think, again, from a recruiter's perspective, it is something that we see. Men do tend to kind of advocate for themselves more, and they do tend to be more, they tend to push more for what they want. And women, I think, again, massive generalization, we are more agreeable, and that is what we tend to see. And so it is absolutely essential that conversation, and I don't think if HR is hush-hush about it, that in itself is bloody dodgy. Why are they? Why should they be? And actually it's funny, because we do end up working with organizations who can't actually go through the hiring process themselves, because they can't advertise what the role is, because I'm like, oh, it's too much internal conflict, and what if someone sees it, and what if someone else in this role? And it's like, any business is doing that, like, there's a bit of a question mark. It's like, why can't it be standardized? We went through a huge project a while ago now, but just standardizing everything, because I think as businesses grow and as they scale and as markets change and as the kind of demand for talent goes crazy, it can end up a little bit skew-if. But we, of course, went through a process of standardizing it all, because it is essential. And I think particularly, I mean, we know we could probably go on a whole nother podcast conversation topic around the kind of gender pay gap and inequality and all of that. But I think you're dead right. I think it is a important thing for people to be aware of. And of course, people should be sharing it amongst themselves. And if there are discrepancies, addressing it and kind of bringing it to the table. And I do know we see it all the time with the reason people leave are little niggles and things like that, and they can be addressed. Often leaders and organizations, they just get busy, and it's just like one thing on a list of many, many things. Whereas if people actually come and address it and approach it and bring it up, change can happen. It's much more rare for businesses to actually be sort of strategically paying people very different salaries and having it all like kind of mismatched. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, and I think it's definitely something that should be a focus. Given, I mean, we could again go on and on about the passionate feminist stance on this. With regards to the kind of particular sector that you were in, I mean, you didn't grow up in Sydney, so you obviously moved here with this career. Did you find that with particularly your area, that it isn't a sector that's very reliant on networks? Was it easy is probably the wrong word, but was it kind of harder for you as someone who hadn't grown up in Sydney, perhaps didn't have parents within the industry or kind of people to call on? Was it more difficult to build that network? I know that is the case in London and kind of back on my side of the world. It can be a bit trickier and a bit more closed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's changing a little bit now. I'm constantly impressed by how willing to advocate for themselves Gen Z are. Like, I'm always inspired by the younger people that I work with because they have this real they're not afraid to kind of toot their own horn and say, this is what I've done. And they really understand the need to cultivate a presence, whether that's an online presence or whether that's being in the industry. I will say that journalism and media in general, it's kind of been gatekept for a very long time by a certain few people. And because it is seen to be this kind of a bit glamorous and a bit behind the veil and a bit exciting, people have taken it for a very long time to be like, oh, well, I guess I have to write for free for a long time first. And I certainly did that. But again, we're talking about privilege. Not everybody has the means to be able to not be paid for their work for, in many cases, years, and be kind of on the sidelines doing extra work while they're still working their shitty job to, make ends meet. So I think, and because of that, that's why I think media has been gatekept by a certain type of people for a long time, because it is a certain type of person who can live at home with their parents while they're, and that's why I think it's important to always champion these kind of diverse voices who haven't traditionally been in media. And again, it is changing, but certainly when I was first writing, I was writing for free for anyone who would have me, and I was guest blogging on people's platforms, and I was, trying to submit work for free. And there's a lot of websites, big media websites that will prey on people's desire to be published and not pay them adequately for their work. And, there's an argument to be made for and against, I think, as well. But I saw a tweet a little while ago about, websites paying people in exposure, and this person had said exposure kills.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's sort of, if you're out in the cold with nothing around you to warm you up, exposure kills. And so it's this double-edged sword of like, you want to get yourself out there and you want to be known because that's how you kind of have this leapfrog. But again, even in the position that I'm in now, I think that, like you say, the network, once you're in the network, you benefit from it and you stop seeing it. It becomes invisible to you. So I think that it is just purely my skill that gets me the commissions that I get. But actually, it's because I have worked with people who, again, know that I'm not a shit writer. They know they can trust me to do a good job. But it is because they know me that I'm getting these opportunities. Yes. So I don't really know what the answer is because, there's still not so much nepotism, but definitely, once you're in it, it's a lot easier to just reach out to someone who knows you and they know you're going to do a good job. So you say, I want you to take a risk on this story that might be a little bit out there. Whereas, an unknown writer or a new uni graduate or someone who hasn't been to uni might have a lot more trouble kind of cracking it.
It's absolutely, it sounds like it's harder to infiltrate. And some sectors are like that. And as you said, particularly the more desirable ones, the ones that are seen as sexier industries, they are often the ones that, are harder to break through. It's the same in London. And the thing with London is that there's so many places that do internships, and that's the way to get in to any magazines or anything within the industry. It's the internship route. And then naturally you're in a situation where who's going to be working for free in London? And so it's kind of at that, in how it works over there, it's quite classist because you tend to rely on then having kind of family members or parents or relatives who can put you up in their spare room in London. And I have kind of read a bit and listened to a bit around how much of an issue that is for people who haven't come from privileged backgrounds to step into media within kind of that side of the world. So it's a tricky thing. And you're right, it's when you're in it, it becomes your norm. And so you have to really consciously be thinking of the next generation and throwing the ladder down. Otherwise you can just sort of get into your flow of how you're doing it. Is there any, like, beyond, again, going back to exposure, beyond exposure and people kind of putting themselves out there, is there anything that you would recommend to anyone who did want to break into this industry in particular?
Yeah, so this is quite a controversial thing. I always get kind of a second look when I tell people this, but I would absolutely unequivocally say don't go to uni.
Yeah, wow.
Don't.
That is controversial.
Well, the media landscape is shifting so quickly.
Yep.
So when I went to uni, we studied what was kind of colloquially called new media, which is now very, very old media. Yeah, it was basically, have you heard of what a blog is? I remember we did this tutorial about where does the word blog come from? Do you know where the word blog comes from?
I do not.
Weblog. It's short for weblog. A weblog of your thoughts and feelings.
There you go.
I mean, again, I'm showing my age because we were talking, blogs had just existed. Twitter was just being invented. The way media is happening now is changing so quickly.
Yeah.
And when you graduate or when you come out of uni, if you're lucky, you will get a job with an organization who will unteach you everything you learned at uni and train you in their particular way. So I would say if you want to tell the news, if you want to write news, then try and get a cadetship with a paper. And, all papers are online these days as well. So it doesn't mean that you have to kind of just be a print journalist. You can be a multimedia journalist, but you want to be trained by a media organization who, has skill in that area, and they will train you. Do courses in media law, which is really important. So you're not accidentally defaming people every time you write an article.
Yeah, study that.
Yeah, exactly. And actually kind of critical thinking and how to report on science, which we've seen in the last couple of years has been, woefully misrepresented skill, because people have, and when it comes to something that is really important, like science reporting or climate reporting, we need journalists who understand the science so they can find a way to make it sexy and palatable to people, because scientists are notoriously bad communicators, but they have the information that we need. And so journalists who understand science are so incredibly important. But again, I think that if you want to be working in media, then the best thing is to just start working in media, and whether or not that's getting an assistant's job or getting, an editorial production assistant's job or a junior producer who's just uploading content and learning the back end of WordPress if you're working in online media. I have, from my own experience and from the interns that I have worked with, many of whom have been absolutely fabulous and will one day be my boss, I think just getting into the industry and doing as much as you possibly can as soon as you possibly can is the best.
Do you think that employers would frown upon not having a degree? Is that something that isn't considered necessarily prestigious within that space?
I think in journalism it's a little bit different because cadetships have typically been the way that people get in. But I think more and more I think the degree is still a little bit of a barrier and probably only in a classist kind of way. But more and more, I think if people are even doing I've got a friend who's got a kid who's going into grade 12 and he's looking to do a multimedia music and post-production course at one of those kind of diploma colleges. I think that the more hands-on experience that you can get, the better. And so obviously if you are looking down the uni path, I think places like UTS or Bathurst Uni typically has a really good hands-on practical kind of journalism program. But again, I think there's many other options other than the tertiary option for you to actually just get in there and start making connections.
And of course, if you think about how fast things move in university, they don't. And so if you think about curriculums and how long it takes to put a curriculum together and how long it takes to cover off all the different modules, how much does the world change at the moment, the digital acceleration that we're all going through over the course of 1 year. So are they going to kind of update everything from an industry perspective within that time? No. So I can so see how it would very quickly fade out, but it's an interesting one. But I suppose again, it's a sector that when you get into it, there's so much more to do with your grit and your eye for things and your kind of capability that are far more important than your ability to memorize information, which is essentially what university has qualified us for.
And I say that as a I'm a professional degree starter. Like, I started off doing law and journalism, and then I definitely dropped the law after a couple of years, and then I just did journalism, and then I did new media. So like, I was at uni for a good 6 years before I came out with anything. And I think probably I would be in the same position I'm in, or perhaps further along, had I just started working in the industry, which is what I always wanted to do from the beginning.
We see that in business a lot at the moment, because of the rise of all of these tech startups and founders and everything. It's actually a little bit more sexy to not go to university and drop out of school and become a Richard Branson or a whoever else.
Just be neurodiverse.
Literally. ADHD, have a business. But it's looked at less favorably these days. And I think it depends country to country. Australia, in my experience recruiting for 12 years, it's never been a big thing. If anyone ever had a good candidate who didn't have a degree, and of course I'm being very broad, of course, if they're going for certain role types, of course, if you want to be a nurse, you have to have a degree.
We hope our doctors have degrees, but you know what?
Get a bit of experience. Yeah.
Show me your skills with a scalpel and we'll talk.
You have grit, right? You're committing to the grit. So yes, of course, that's not for everyone. But yeah, it's definitely looked at less favorably, I think. And when you can get in and get that real, and again, I think that probably ties in with how quickly things are moving. So when you can get in somewhere and get that real life experience in certain sectors, that can be more beneficial in how fast it can accelerate your career. Touching on, I guess, and you've mentioned a couple of times about various different mentors and work wives and people. How have people kind of shaped the career that you have? Have you always been very clear in having mentors, or have people kind of just cropped up and you've sort of built good relationships with them? Like, how has that side of things gone?
Yeah, I think from the very beginning of my career, I've always had somebody who's been willing to champion me. When I first started writing, I connected with this wonderful woman called Blair Police, and she's a climate activist, and she got me writing a few little pieces. She was running a magazine called Green Pages at the time, and she got me writing some pieces, and then from there I worked with a great guy called Ian, who was my senior writer when I was a junior writer, and he kind of really, again, championed me. And then I was kind of cocooned in the bosom of the all-female workplace. And I have been very lucky to work in incredible workplaces where everybody's been so incredibly supportive. But as I've gotten older and I've started to be able to be the mentor to people, I've also just been so incredibly inspired by like the young, particularly women coming up in media. Like, they are so smart and they are so open and so generous and so non-competitive. There's a real sense of like helping each other up that I've seen, and they're so woke as well. Like, I know we're not even allowed to use the word woke anymore, so
cancelled instantly.
Again, yeah, but that's like I'm really interested by how they change the conversation, and me going through life thinking that I know the right way to talk about things, and then you realize all of a sudden that actually you don't. That your way of thinking and doing things can be outdated or can be challenged. A lot of the younger women I've worked with have just been incredibly inspiring to me, and they've opened my mind a lot, and I think they're going to do amazing things. And they're also like cross media as well. They're not like print journalists or digital journalists. They're just like, I do a podcast and I also have a sign and I also do TikTok, and I'm just, they got their fingers in all the pies. They just know how to do content.
It's fascinating, isn't it? It makes me feel old.
Oh, same.
Very, very old. But it is. I think it's so important to have that cross-generational exposure. And I notice it even in the people that we hire. We've got people across a couple of generations, and it is different, and they come to the table with different things. And I agree with you. I adore that sort of co-collaboration or collaboration, probably doesn't need a co on the front of it, but that sort of support that they give one another. And I think that's probably, it is very outdated now, but the generation maybe above us, particularly within business, there was often only one seat at the table for a woman. And so there was kind of an idea that you had to compete for it. And therefore, perhaps for women, it was more competitive and it was kind of pitting women against each other rather than working together. Whereas I do think that's changed in my experience in business and in women in business, is that there is far more often it is a situation in a case where women are willing to support each other and give a leg up. And whether that's kind of to the people above you, the people below you in the same level. And it makes a big difference. It's very important. In terms of leaving, I don't want to leave because I honestly could just keep chatting to you for 4 hours and hours on end.
We're sleeping here, right?
Yeah. We're moving in. Yeah. It's official. But in terms of thinking about anyone who's listening who might be stuck in a rut, not loving what they're doing, feeling like they want to change. COVID has resulted in many of us kind of rethinking things and looking at things with a different lens. Given we've heard now how much you do love what you do, is there any advice you'd give someone who just feels like they need to shake things up and they're feeling like they're not loving their work?
I am a huge advocate for quitting your job. I really am.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. Well,
one day in, go.
That's it. I'm like, I am a job quitter professional. But I think there are always options. And it's this funny thing with freelancing. And it sounds really wanky when I say it. But it's a known thing. When you talk to other freelancers or people who run their own businesses or anybody who's kind of doing their own projects, there's this famine or feast thing that happens when you first start. And so you go, I'm terrified because I don't have that regular paycheck. So I'm going to say yes to absolutely everything. And then all of a sudden you're overwhelmed with jobs and you're trying to cram 80 hours worth of work into the 20 hours you've assigned to it. And you get really, really busy and really, really stressed. And then but you don't want to kind of let go of anything. And I feel like the best piece of advice I could give someone who wants to start out, I guess, as a freelancer or wants to start their own side hustle or whatever it is, it doesn't have to be media specific, but I think hold things very gently and have a certain amount of faith that the balance is going to find itself. You're going to find that groove and you're going to find, if you're good at what you do, then you're going to find a kind of a good equilibrium. You don't have to hold tight to it. Like one of my good friends who you also know, Sally, once told me that a therapist once told her, you can either be a rock or you can be a twig. And she was like, and so a rock in a river, right? You think you want to be the rock. You think you want to be the sturdy rock that's in the river, that's withstanding. But what happens to rocks in rivers is that they get eroded over time because the water keeps going regardless and they're the ones that break down. And if you're a twig, you're floating on the surface of the river and you're going where it takes you. And it's quite effortless because you aren't creating this resistance that is then eroding the thing that makes you you. So if you can just hold gently to the things that, and obviously like when you talk about money and career, it's very hard to just go, well, just hold it gently. And that again, we talked a lot about privilege, but again, it is a privilege to be able to say, I'm going to trust that because not everybody has that ability. But if it is something that you love and a project that you would like to create, hold it gently, follow the flow, be the twig or whatever you want to do. And I believe that you will find eventually that things happen in a way that is quite organic. And then you find yourself with the right balance of work and with a kind of instinct for saying yes to some projects and no to others. So I think hold it gently. Don't be too rigid about how you think it needs to look because it will evolve. And even, we've found with our own podcast that I've been doing, in the beginning, you'd get this like one bad review like, oh, I hate her nasal voice or they talk too much or that dumb bitch says too much, whatever it is. And you start to hold really, really tightly to it and you go, oh my God, the people don't like it. I have to change it. And what we've discovered is that it's only you that's setting the rules. Yeah. And the rules don't exist. You can just do whatever you want to do and it will take shape as however it wants to evolve. And so, hold things gently and don't get too rigid about wanting to make it look like you think it should look because how it looks is how it actually should look.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. And as you were talking, I was hearing you nodding so profusely, but also just picturing myself in my busiest periods going, I'm a twig, I'm a twig, I'm a twig.
I'm a twig. I'm just being a twig. Yeah. Well, it's true because, that's like the twig is the one that manages to get all the way downstream intact.
Yeah. I'm often not intact. I'm being eroded, a rock being eroded by my own schedule. Yeah. That's amazing. And I agree so much with such lovely advice. And it isn't an angle that I've kind of heard being taken on it before. It's to kind of go gentle because we do all go so hard. And particularly when you're type A's and you're driven and you want to achieve, you kind of just kind of run at things with force, but also white knuckle things. I think so many of us sort of have this white knuckle grip on how we think things should be and things should go. And actually, if we're going to go a little bit woo-woo, which I can tend to, if you think about the whole idea of manifestation, it's that you have an idea of what the end result is, but you're not married or wedded to the process of getting there. That's the bit that you need to surrender on. That's the bit that you need to sort of give into. And that's exactly what you've described. And that's what I was thinking of as you were talking. It is the whole idea of manifestation, that it's the end bit, and that's that you have the goal and we need to be working towards something. But I do think in this society and I feel it even with the amount of, whether it's emails, whether it's Teams, whether it's my LinkedIn notifications, my everything, WhatsApp, like it's all coming at me and I can feel the grip after 4 days back from leave already. Everything's tightening, but you kind of do just, need to go gentle with it. So it's good advice. Amazing. You are honestly so good for squeezing in an hour in your very, very busy schedule. You've got the podcast awards tonight. You are a finalist, which is very exciting. Wishing you all the best with that. But thank you so much for coming in. It's an absolute pleasure to see you. And I loved every minute of that.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a joy.